What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. This is the Inner Circle. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning. Happy Saturday. This is when we go live and chat about stuff. So you'll notice I have a different backdrop behind me. I'm actually in the process of setting up my studio. You should see this. So we just moved to Greenbrier, and I left my pallet wall in Colorado Springs and stuff. So this is the current state of the state. I've got an overhead light here. I've got another light here. My laptop currently is sitting on a step stool on top of a wood milk crate, I guess you could call it. And then right here, I've got the backdrop behind me and another softer light here. So behind here, actually, I have a whiteboard that I'll be doing my teaching and whiteboarding and stuff on, so get excited. But right now it's a work in progress, so you can actually even see the edges here. I haven't quite got the zoom figured out, and I'll actually be constructing something a little more permanent, but this will work for the moment. I'm actually talking to you guys this morning about something pretty powerful, I think. A new article came out by Scientific American that goes through the carbohydrates and fats debate as it stands currently. And it's not just a debate, okay? Like when Scientific American comes out with an article, very well cited article, they have over 120 research studies and scholarly articles linked, and a lot of those represent meta-analysis, which means that they've gone through hundreds of studies themselves. And so when you look at an article like this, it takes the huge body of scientific research that's out there about carbs and fats right now and boils it down to the essential pieces. What does it all say? What does it all mean? And what kind of conclusions can we extrapolate from it? And if you're new to the whole debate, the questions of fats and carbs ranges far and wide. Should you be eating more carbohydrates? Are whole grains good or bad for you? What about the ketogenic diet? Should you, subsist on a steady diet of coconut oil and chicken for the rest of your life? What does that look like? And so I wanted to just do a brief review of the actual what we know of carbs and fats. Actually, if you go through this whole article, if you print it out, it's 27 pages. Okay, it's a lot of information, and again, well cited, distilling down lots of research. So very, very powerful stuff. However, at the very end of the article, they take the time to talk about current controversies. That means the things that we don't currently have answers to, definitive answers to from a scientific perspective. That's a big deal. And then they have another box 2, that are points of consensus. That is, we know this for sure. We know from a scientific perspective that these things hold true. And there's about 9 points in each of those boxes. So I wanted to briefly run through with you. And I think the reason I want to do this with you is because there are a lot of opinions in the health and fitness world. In fact, I share my opinion with you regularly. Now, I'm not placing my opinion on the same value as somebody else random on the internet's opinion. I generally do my best to show you how my opinion formed, how it's worked out in my professional experience, how it works out in my personal life, how it matches the demographic of people I generally work with. And I'm also pretty careful to share with you the caveats when my opinion doesn't hold true, right? So the hormone pyramid is a good example of my opinion where science, nutrition, lifestyle, and behavior change all collide to give you a prioritized list of behaviors that you can follow in a stair-step fashion in order to become healthier and happier and optimize your hormones for your betterment. So that's an example of my opinion, and that is 13 years of my fitness industry experience boiled down into a diagram and some behaviors, right? But when we talk about opinions, there is a difference when we talk about what we know scientifically and what science admits we don't know and are controversies worth looking into right now. So let's talk about what we do know first, the points of consensus. And I'm reading directly from the article, okay? So points of consensus says, with a focus on nutrient quality, good health and low chronic disease risk can be achieved for many people on diets with a broad range of carbohydrate to fat ratios. Basically, that number one point of consensus is that regardless of carbohydrate grams or fat grams in somebody's diet, nutrient quality matters more. Okay, so the fat in a Twinkie is not the same as the fat in an avocado. And I know when I say that, it's like, well, duh. It's not well duh in the research world. It's actually really hard to parse out that data, but we've come to a point of consensus over the last 30 years that nutrient quality seems to matter more than nutrient quantity. The carbs in Skittles are not the same as the carbs in sweet potatoes. The fat in avocado is not the same as a fat in a Twinkie. And so if you need a hard and fast rule to guide yourself daily with regard to nutrition, pick quality food items that are higher in fiber, that are higher in water content, that are more likely to grow on a tree or in the ground or from an animal, not so processed, heavily processed in such a way that there's no way your great-great-grandmother would have recognized this as a food item, okay? Number 2, replacement of saturated fat with naturally occurring unsaturated fats provides health benefits for the general population. Industrially produced trans fats are harmful and should be eliminated. The metabolism of saturated fat may differ on carbohydrate-restricted diets, an issue that requires study. What is this saying? Are saturated fats good or bad? Butter, bacon, red meats and stuff, are they good or bad? It seems to matter, we don't know yet, but it seems to matter that saturated fat is or isn't paired with a highly processed carbohydrate diet as well. So if you're eating a burger from McDonald's, which would be a highly saturated fat, but also highly refined carbohydrate source, right? That's going to have a different effect on you. Or fried chicken would be a high saturated fat, but also highly processed carbohydrates. Those are going to have different effects on you than if you're having a diet high in saturated fat, let's say coconut oil or butter or whatever, when all of the other aspects of your diet are relatively low in processed carbohydrates. And so that point of consensus there is trans fats equal bad. Saturated fat requires more study to understand how it's affecting the general population. The one thing we can say about saturated fats is replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, which would be things like walnuts, right? Fat for fat, grams of fat, it's positive benefits across the board. Okay, so it's not saying saturated fats are bad. It's saying that positive benefits across the board, generally when you include polyunsaturated fats in the diet as a source of fat. Number 3, replacement of highly processed carbohydrates, that is refined grains, potato products, free sugars, with unprocessed carbohydrates, non-starchy vegetables, whole foods, legumes, or minimally processed grains, provides health benefits. Replacement of highly processed carbohydrates with very low processed carbohydrates has health benefits. That's a consensus. And we tell our kids this, vegetables are good for you. Done. Don't eat your Sour Patch Kids, eat your vegetables, right? I don't know who serves Sour Patch Kids with dinner, but that is a consensus, okay? So when you hear people say, well, no, you have to have 20% of your calories from carbohydrates and you have to have blah, 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 the consensus is, from a health perspective, that if you just replace those carbohydrates, not change the percentage and change the grams and stuff, if it meets your macros, you can have a Pop-Tart, replace those garbage carbohydrates with real carbohydrates that are minimally processed, you're going to be in a much better boat. That is a consensus from 30 years or last 30 years of scientific research. 4, biological factors appear to influence responses to diets of differing macronutrient composition. People with relatively normal insulin sensitivity and beta cell function may do well on diets with a wide range of carbohydrate to fat ratios. Those with insulin resistance, hypersecretion of insulin, or glucose intolerance may benefit from a lower carbohydrate, higher fat diet. What is this saying? The consensus is there is a biological difference among people that might account for why some diets work for some people and other diets work for others. They use the example of insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity here, which is dictated very largely by your genetic heritage. I've also used the example on the show of amylase production. There's an enzyme in your saliva called amylase, and some people genetically produce more amylase. It breaks down carbohydrates, and some people genetically don't produce very much of it, which means that one person might process carbohydrates differently from another person. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. And the consensus, and this is very heartening to me, that the scientific community is not only catching on, but saying this openly and out loud. It's different. It matters whether or not your genetics have been taken into account with regard to this diet. So it is possible that some people have found the magic diet for them, but that doesn't mean it's the magic diet for you, and that's powerful and important. Number 5, a ketogenic diet may confer particular metabolic benefits for some people with abnormal carbohydrate metabolism, a possibility that requires long-term study. So it's a big deal because the ketogenic diet right now has been such a craze that a lot of people are trying it. And they're like, there's so many studies out there that show this is really good. What the scientific community has a consensus on with regard to ketogenic diets is that it can confer positive benefits to people who process carbohydrates abnormally. Weird amylase production, weird things going on in the mind, weird things going on in the body. Okay, but if you're a relatively normal carbohydrate digester, relatively normal carbohydrate processor, then a ketogenic diet is not, by the scientific community's admission, is not recommended to you. And then, here's the big kicker, this requires long-term study. We have no idea what happens to a regular person's body, or even an abnormal person's body, by contrast, when you consume a diet that results in ketogenesis for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? That's the big thing, right? With regard to ketogenic diets, especially, really any fad. They're like, oh, the studies show, those studies last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. Sometimes they're a meta-analysis that'll look at 6 months with 10,000 participants, but that's 6 months, okay? What about 10 years from now? What if you die of heart disease because you experimented on yourself because some studies showed there were benefits over 8 weeks for your body fat percentage? I don't know if that's a gamble you want to take. So I don't want to scare you away from trying new things and finding what works really well for you. But when people say, science says ketogenic diets might be beneficial for the long term for people who have strange carbohydrate metabolism in their body, or abnormal, as they call it. Abnormal. That's what does abnormal mean? That means like diabetes or epilepsy or insulin resistance, that kind of stuff. That's abnormal carbohydrate metabolism. So that's what we know. That's the consensus so far. We'll talk about the controversies in a second. Number 6, well-formulated, low-carbohydrate, high-fat diets do not require high intakes of protein or animal products. Reduced carbohydrate consumption can be achieved by substituting grains, starchy veggies, and sugars with non-hydrogenated plant oils, nuts, seeds, avocados, and higher plant foods. Why is this an important thing? You're like, well, duh, I guess, you could have an avocado instead of another steak. The reason this has to be said from a scientific perspective is that a lot of people who go keto or introduce a lot of fat to their diets are getting that from animal products. Good, bad, or indifferent. Personally, I'm a carnivore in the sense that I love to eat meat. But this is important because for some people, an increased amount of red meats, for instance, or an increased amount of animal products in their diet, especially if they're not focused on good quality animal products, a jar of, I don't know if you've ever had these Vienna sausages. You ever had those? They're like, that's an animal product. You can go, oh, fat and protein for 99 cents. Yeah. Like that's what we call a processed meat. And processed meats increase the incidence of colorectal cancer. That's a big deal. It increases the incidence of a bad cholesterol count, increased inflammation in the body, and therefore higher LDLs, lower HDLs, and the particle size shrinks. That's a bad thing. That could increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. And so what this has to say from a scientific perspective is, if you are going to increase the fats in your diet, don't just go increase your animal product consumption to the point that you're like, dude, you could have bacon with every meal and that'll get you in ketosis. It's really good. Like, all the nitrates that you're consuming when you do something like that are going to have a negative impact on you. And I like bacon just as well as the next person, and we eat it regularly in my house, but we're not eating bacon every day, and we're not eating it 3 times a day or 5 times a day. And let's not demonize bacon. You can do this with a number of things from an animal product perspective. So very, very important piece there. If you're just joining us, we're going through the recent Scientific American article about the consensus and the controversy around carbohydrates versus fats in the diet conversation. We're talking about all of the points that they've distilled down from 30 years of research, very well cited article, citing very well cited meta-analysis. And so this is a very good distillation of what we know about carbs versus fats. Number 7, this is the last point of consensus in the scientific community right now. There is broad agreement regarding the fundamental components of a healthy diet that can serve to inform policy and clinical management. Nonetheless, important questions relevant to epidemics of diet-related chronic disease remain. Greater investment in nutrition research needs to assume a higher priority. Why does it say that? It says that because if you actually read the article, remember it's 27 pages, it's a long article, okay? If you actually read the article, at one point it talks about the amount of money spent on nutrition research. We're talking 10 cents or less for every dollar in tax dollars when we're talking about research grants and stuff. Every 10 cents on every dollar of tax dollars is spent on nutrition as a whole, not just like the weight loss epidemic or diabetes or ketogenics, good or bad, whatever. We're talking about a very, very minuscule amount of the budget for research for health and fitness is spent at all in this realm. So it's saying, hey, like if we're going to spend so much money elsewhere, yeah, I'm sure we could find money that we're spending that's really stupid and put it into this. It's a very big problem and needs to be funded better. So as with any very large scientific article, somebody has to pay the bills, and the way you pay the bills here, they're saying, hey, we need to research this much more deeply and much further, which I want to talk about in a second. So what are the takeaways from the consensus? Quality matters more than quantity. Okay, if you're eating a diet relatively high in vegetables, if you're eating a diet relatively high in quality animal products, you're getting a good source of healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, and you're limiting the heavily processed foods in your diet. You're not eating a lot of Twinkies. You're not even the protein bars that are supposed to be health foods. They're heavily processed. Okay, most of them are heavily processed. Most of them are just as garbage as a Snickers. And so, if you're eating a diet high in quality nutrients, that matters way more than the quantity of nutrients. And then the other takeaway you can have from that is that there is a lot of study that needs to be done on the long-term effects on things like ketogenic diets, okay? If you are going to increase the fats in your world, don't do it by simply adding, more bacon or Vienna sausages or whatever it is that you're doing. Be smart, and it's helpful, and it said here, you can add your polyunsaturated sources like your avocados, your coconut oils, your walnuts and stuff. Those are going to be a much better add to your current diet if you're going to increase your fats and decrease your carbohydrates with no health negatives. Now, let's talk about current controversies. A lot, I don't know if it's because I like to argue or what, I don't know what it is, but controversies teach me much more than consensus. Like, okay, we all agree this is good. And a lot of times I'm like, well, duh, we all knew that. Eat more veggies, eat less cereal. Duh, like we got it. Thank you. But controversies teach you a lot. And controversies mean there's a really strong debate on both sides and the research is unclear. And for me, these say a lot more about the state of health and fitness for carbohydrates and fat. And I hope you get a lot out of them as well. There are 9 major controversies with regard to carbs and fats. Here we go. Number 1, do diets with various carbohydrate to fat proportions affect body composition independently of energy intake? Do they affect energy expenditure independently of body weight? What the hell does that mean? It means, is it possible that consuming 2,000 calories is the only thing that matters for you to lose weight, regardless of whether it's from proteins or fats or carbohydrates or whatever? And then additionally, because that's a controversy. Okay, a lot of people would say, well, it's not how many calories you eat, it's whether or not your proteins match your macros as it's supposed to be in carbohydrates and fats. That's a controversy. It's not proven that higher fat diets do better for body composition than higher carb diets. It's not clear. It's a controversy right now. And even more interesting, do they affect energy expenditure independently of body weight? In other words, is it possible that it changes your metabolism but doesn't change your weight? I'm going to say that again. Is it possible that changing your macronutrients only changes how your body processes food, but doesn't actually change your body composition? That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. So that's a controversy right now. We don't know. We don't know what the best macronutrient breakdown is for you. I have a theory. I have a hypothesis, and the hypothesis probably won't surprise you. It depends on your genetic heritage and how that has developed over time for you. In other words, you might be different from me, and whether or not you've exercised and conditioned yourself changes what you might also do as well. It's going to be a one size fits, or it's not a one size fits all. It's going to be a personalized approach that gets us there. She says, what's up, Brianna? She says, does the article say anything about vitamin supplements? It does not. There is very little in this article at all about supplements. And the reason is, it's not because they're shirking the issue. It's because the scope of this article is talking about specifically carbohydrate consumption versus fat consumption. What does that do to us? What does it do to our health? What does it do to our body weight? What does it do to our body composition? What does it do to our energy disposition? So they're not actually talking about supplements in this article whatsoever, unless it pertains specifically to supplementing fat or supplementing carbohydrates, which is not what you're asking about there. Number two, another point of controversy. Do ketogenic diets provide metabolic benefits beyond those of moderate carbohydrate restriction? Can they help with prevention or treatment of cardiometabolic disease? In other words, do you need to go keto, or could you just simply cut out the processed carbohydrates in your diet to get the same benefits that people are saying ketogenic diets give people, right? Better energy, better body composition, blah, blah, blah. Similarly, can they help with the prevention or treatment of cardiometabolic disease? That the jury's out on that. And actually, as I was saying earlier, when we're talking about long-term results of high-fat diets, especially ketogenic diets, we don't know. So maybe you improve the lipid profile in this moment, and your doctor goes, oh, wow, your cholesterol's gotten better. And people go, the ketogenic diet helped me, right? But if you die 5 years from now from cardiometabolic disease, even though your blood markers look great, right? And I'm not saying you will. I'm just saying we don't know. We have no idea. We don't know what the long-term effects of ketogenic diets are in the general population. So that is a point of controversy, important one to point out. Number three, what are the optimal amounts of specific fatty acids, saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated, in the context of a very low carbohydrate diet? So let's say you do eat 20%, 30% of your diet from carbohydrates. That's what we would classify as a very low carbohydrate diet. That might be 100 grams or less of carbohydrates in your day, depending on what your total intake is. If that's what it looks like, then what's the optimal amount of the different types of fat? Because not all fats are created equal, right? I say monounsaturated fat, that might come from a source like an almond. An almond has monounsaturated fats, and a polyunsaturated fat source might be like walnuts. Those are two different types of fats, and some people seem to process those differently. And then saturated fats, things like your grass-fed butter or your red meats, your beefs and stuff, those are going to have your beefs. There's multiple sources of beef. Come on, Alex. Your red meats are generally high in things like your saturated fats or even your coconut oil, right? The question is, what's the optimal amount of each type? Should we have no unsaturated fat and only poly and mono? Should we have polyunsaturated fat and very little mono and very little unsaturated? Is there an ideal breakdown of the fat breakdown that we should all be eating? And that's a controversy right now. Nobody knows if you should only be eating fish, or nobody knows if you should only be eating walnuts, or nobody knows if a good amount of beef and a good amount of avocado and a good amount of coconut oil, all those are part of your healthy low carb diet. We don't know. That's a controversy. Number four, what is the relative importance for cardiovascular disease on the amounts of LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, or lipoprotein particle size for persons with distinct fat to carbohydrate ratios? Are there other biomarkers of equivalent or greater importance? That's a big deal. Basically, what it's saying is it's a controversy right now whether or not we even know what your blood work means. That's a big deal. You go to the doctor every year, and well, I mean, if you go to the doctor every year, go to the doctor every year, and they do like they can do a finger prick now. It used to have to be a blood draw, but they can do a finger prick now, and they can tell you your HDL, your LDL, and your blood glucose and your triglycerides. Right, a relatively quick thing. What this is saying is, depending on what you're eating, we don't know what those numbers should be for the healthiest version of you. We have no idea. It's a controversy. It's a controversy. Hours and hours and hours and millions of dollars spent on scientific research. And you can be sitting in your doctor's office and he can look you in the face and say, hey, your cholesterol's too high. I'm going to need you to start exercising. Or, hey, your cholesterol's too high. I'm going to need to put you on Lipitor or whatever. And what the science actually says is he doesn't know. That's a big deal. And I'm not dissing your doctor right now. I'm saying I don't know either. But what the science actually says is we don't know. We don't know what your LDL should be. We don't know what your HDL should be. We don't know if it's okay if your LDL is high, but the particle size is large. And it's really bad if your LDL is high and your particle size is small. We don't know what that looks like. Does that matter if you're ketogenic versus if you're high carbohydrate? We don't know what that looks like. And so what we're saying here is what you eat, your nutrient intake affects your blood work, but we're not sure how measuring blood work tells us if what you're eating is good for you or not. That's a big deal. Now, I will say that they leave something out here. And the one thing they leave out here is the relative blood sugar and A1C levels. And I would argue that if you know that, if you know how your blood sugar is responding, you know how your insulin is responding, you know how your A1C is responding, then we can make some really good assumptions about whether or not this is going to lead to problems for you in the future. In fact, the science is very clear about blood sugar, A1C, and insulin. And what the science says about that is the inflammatory response created by high insulin, high A1C, high blood sugars leads to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and possibly even psychiatric issues like depression and anxiety. And so we might not know what LDL, HDL, triglycerides have to do with whether or not you should be eating high fat or low carb or what kind of carbs and fat you should be eating or whatever. But we do know that if you take the sugar component and add it to the blood work, if you add your blood glucose and your A1C together, elevated blood sugar and elevated A1C, always a bad thing. Always a bad thing, regardless of your HDL, LDL ratio. In fact, when I've interpreted HDL, LDL, triglycerides and stuff, I always look at the sugar first. Is my blood glucose elevated here in a fasted state? If so, we also look at the A1C. We look at those two things together, and then we can make some assumptions about whether or not LDLs, HDLs, and triglycerides are being beneficial to us. In fact, when they teach you to look over those kind of things from a functional health perspective, I've worked with several functional health doctors, and holistic medical practitioners, DOs, and such. When you look at that, we always look at the sugar first. And then we can make assumptions about the rest of the stuff. But the truth is, if you just had LDL, just had HDL, just had particle size, we can't really make a lot of assumptions because those we're not diagnostically indicative of cardiometabolic disease or other issues that we might find there. Number 5, what are the effects of dietary fat amount and quality across the lifespan on the risk of neurodegenerative, pulmonary, and other diseases that have not been well studied? This is a big deal, okay? What are the effects of dietary fat amount and quality across a lifespan on the risk of neurodegenerative, pulmonary, and other diseases? Now, this is a controversy. I also think it's kind of a cop-out by this article because we don't know a lot about anything over the lifespan of anybody. Okay, like smoking, that's probably it. Smoking and exercise. We know smoking bad, exercise good. Do that over your lifespan. Do exercise over your lifespan, you'll probably be good. Smoking over your lifespan, bad. You know what? You know who's got this figured out? You want to know how things affect people over a lifespan? Try to buy life insurance. Like their actuarial models are amazingly well constructed because they have to manage, the risk of whether or not you might die. And the health measures that they take and the questions they ask you, they all revolve around things like, do you exercise 3 to 5 days per week? And then they ask, do you smoke? And smoking is a surefire way to pay more for your health insurance because we estimate it takes about 10 years off of a person's life. And then exercise is a surefire way to pay less for health insurance, or excuse me, not health insurance, life insurance. Exercise is a surefire way to, I think we should pay less for health insurance. This isn't a political conversation, but really, you'll pay less for life insurance if you exercise regularly. And that's because we know those two things affect you over a lifespan. We know that. We know that for a fact. The actuarial models and data are in. If you exercise, it's good, you're going to live longer. If you smoke, it's bad, you're going to live shorter. But that's about it. That's about it. So I feel like this is kind of a cop-out on number 5, the controversies of this article that we'd still like to figure out. We'd like to figure out a lot of things about how things affect us over a lifespan. And there are some challenges to studying that. You change a lot. There's a lot of factors. Your genetic makeup is different from, so-and-so's genetic makeup. What I think is going to give us some clues as to what's best over a lifespan for people is going to be in the world of genetic research. So I think if you can take a person's genetic alleles and the technology's there, and it's relatively low cost for us now to know our genetic makeup and profile. I've got mine saved on my computer. It's a very, very long document of A's, G's, C's, T's, and I think those are something like that. A, G, C, and T. I think those are the ones. But the tyrosine, cytidine, anyway, sorry, that was the ADHD moment. I'm sure I have an allele for that. The point is, when we have that data and we can look at activities over a lifespan, we might be able to talk to people about what the effects of their nutrition and exercise will have on them over a lifespan. Or as I did a recent interview on the show, I'm really excited about coming out. Look out for the release of Caroline's interview. We talk about genetics, and she talks about having a user manual for yourself. And that's kind of cool. I love that. I think that's something we should have in kindergarten. Here's your user manual for yourself. Here's how you're different from other people. Here's how you're the same. Here's what you should probably be doing on a daily basis just to take good care of yourself and maximize your genetic potential. That's cool. Anyway, so I think that's a cop-out controversy. Number 6, what are the long-term efficacies of diets with different carbohydrate to fat proportions in chronic disease prevention and treatment under optimal intervention conditions? In other words, how do we help people eat what they're supposed to? How do we help people eat what they're supposed to? Is it best to have them count calories? Is it best to have them assign points to specific foods like the Weight Watchers program? Is it best to put them in a group of people who talk about what they eat every week? What's the best way to improve people's ability to eat what they know they should be eating? And that's a point of controversy. We don't know. We're not really sure. And I went live and talked about this. I even did a show on it recently about what the most successful weight loss interventions, the 3 things that they all had in common. And I think that it was really important. You want to go check that information out, have at it. But one of the things that really stood out to me about that was the social support and the professional support. Every single beneficial way to lose weight, improve body composition includes those 2 things, is a focus on getting some professional support and guidance. Okay, not here's your meal plan, live long and prosper. You can Google that. You don't need to pay somebody for that. What we need is somebody who knows what the heck they're doing and can guide you through the process. And that is a winner there. And then the other thing was that your social support system is behind you, that you have people who will slap you on the butt, high five you, whatever, and keep you in line and help you and encourage you and that kind of thing. So that separates the wheat from the chaff in that perspective. But it's a controversy. We don't know scientifically what the best way forward is. So if somebody tells you this is the best way, they're lying. They don't know. We don't know. Number 7, what behavioral and environmental interventions can maximize long-term dietary compliance? That's kind of along the same lines, the environmental and behavioral. I'm I was just reminded it's almost Christmas. Well, it's not close enough to Christmas for us to play Christmas music in our house. In fact, Kristen doesn't even like Christmas music. Fun fact, she doesn't like Christmas. I'm like, what? Oh, come all ye faithful. She's like, on Christmas Eve, that's it. You don't get to play your. I play Reliant K. That's my album of choice. So Christmas is coming up, and Gabriel loves Elf. Will Ferrell in Elf. He thinks it's the coolest movie, and he watches it pretty much on repeat, at least every day, every other day, around this time of year. Last year it was Home Alone. He thought Home Alone was so cool. I'm sure we'll pepper in some Home Alone soon, which is awesome. Gotta teach the kid the classics. Anyway, I'm reminded of that scene where Will Ferrell walks by this coffee shop in New York, and it has in the window it says "World's Best Coffee," and he runs into there and he's like, "Congratulations! World's best coffee. Great job, everyone." And they're all looking at him like, what the hell? What's up with this guy? And I mean, that's what the health and fitness world's like. You got your sign, world's best coffee, world's best weight loss program, get the best results, Orange Theory is the best, right? You have this in the health and fitness world, these unsubstantiated claims of the answer everybody needs posted in the window, and some unsuspecting victim runs in and is like, yeah, great job, this is awesome. Like, world's best coffee according to whom? Right? What success stories do you have for your coffee, right? And I'm not saying that you should stop drinking coffee at your local coffee shop. I love any good coffee shop. My favorite coffee is the place where I can go get a cup of coffee and nobody bothers me while I get my work done. That's the world's best coffee. But what I'm talking about here is in the health and fitness world, there are a lot of claims out there about the best way to do things. And as soon as somebody says, this is the best way, this is the thing we've been missing, this is the thing that we need to do, as soon as somebody start to get really skeptical, because the world of information allows us to cherry pick whatever pseudoscience or results we want to see, and then boom, there it is. In my opinion, the way you tell whether or not there's the best program or not is, one, are they offering to personalize this for you? Are they offering to sit down with you and talk to you about where you're at, what you're doing, and what you could be doing in order to get your best results? And two, along with personalization, is this something that you can talk to various people from various walks of life and hear about their experience? If you can't actually talk to somebody who is different from you, or whatever, that it's not their before and after pictures. Oh, she got results, maybe I will too. That's a really good way to understand if this is malarkey or not. So there you go. Number 8. What individual genetic and phenotypic factors predict long-term beneficial outcomes on diets, various fat to carbohydrate compositions? Can this knowledge inform personalized nutrition and translate to prevention and treatment? So there are diet plans out there that say, we're going to test your genetics, and then we're going to send you a meal plan in the meal specifically catered to you. We don't know. We don't know. Maybe they could give us some guidelines. Maybe they could say, and I've had this said to me, you have the ApoE4 genetic allele mutation, which says that a diet higher in saturated fat likely will result in a higher risk of cardiometabolic disease. We don't know, but it could increase your risk of cardiometabolic disease. And so I make the decision to not have so much cheese on the things that I like to eat. I love cheese. My stomach doesn't love cheese, but I love cheese. I make a decision, hey, I've got that genetic mutation. I don't need to be eating that. I make the decision to eat an avocado, or I make the decision to use olive oil rather than coconut oil when I'm cooking. Not sauteing. Olive oil sauteed just smokes and creates trans fats, bad juju. The point is, I can make some conscious decisions about a few of the things I know about my genetic makeup. But as far as, can you give me a meal plan specific to my genetic profile? You can't. We don't know. Number 9. This is the last controversy. How does variation in the carbohydrate to fat ratio and in sources of dietary fat affect the affordability and environmental sustainability of diets? What does that mean? When the paleo diet was really hot and heavy, like 8 years ago now? Am I that old? That's funny. I'm about to turn 30, so I've been thinking about things like, oh shoot, and then like the Britney Spears era was almost 30 years ago. What? When did that happen? Um, and if you're older than me, you're like, come on, Alex. And I'm sorry, but this is a new thing for me, looking back on life and going, wow, that was so long ago, but it wasn't really. What it's saying is when the paleo diet came around and everybody's like, go paleo, like get rid of minimally processed carbohydrates, get not just that. They said get rid of all grains, no wheat. I can't remember. I think it was like no rice. I mean, if you were hardcore paleo, they were like, we're going pre-agricultural. Anything you can grow, don't eat it. You should eat bugs, and you should eat coconuts, and you should eat cows. Those are the only things. Hate to break it to them, but livestock was actually along with the agricultural revolution. So if you're getting rid of wheat, you might as well also get rid of beef and chicken. Just saying, and subsist on deer and grasshoppers. But the hunter-gatherer diet really was like nuts and berries and bugs and the bone marrow from a carrion kill. A really interesting book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. He's a really arrogant writer. But if you're interested in the history of mankind and what we actually ate, go read that book. Like that'll get down and dirty, and you can decide if the modern technological revolutions with regard to food processes are beneficial or not to you. By those standards, you're going to be out in the woods looking for insects before too long. You'll get hungry enough for that, and you will eat anything if you've gone without real food for 20 days. So what it's saying here, though, is what I concluded with the paleo diet. It was like, if we all eat this way, one, can we afford that? Two, what the heck is it going to do to the planet if we eat this way? Maybe you don't think that way, maybe you do. But this is a controversy from a scientific perspective. It's like, hey, look, fine, maybe some people do better with a higher fat diet and lower carbohydrate diet. Does that mean we need to scrap all of our grain fields and switch them over to livestock fields? And did you know that the cost per calorie for beef is very high in terms of water, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, in terms of shipping and stuff? The cost per calorie is way higher in beef than it is in something like brown rice. The cost per calorie is ridiculously higher. Okay, that's why it's expensive to eat healthy. For not just because of the animal products, but because of high quality food generally costs more than low quality food by a large margin. A bag of Doritos, they're turning a profit at $2 a bag, whereas a organic bell pepper costs like $4. So the cost per calorie there is just ridiculously different. And so the question is, and this is a controversy in the scientific community right now, let's say we find the perfect diet. What's the cost? And is that available to everybody? Probably not. And it's a controversy. We don't know. We don't know how we as a population should be eating for our insides forever, and what that cost might actually look like as a society. I'm about to partner on Defining Dad Bod with a really interesting business called Chirps. And Chirps is a business where they've created, I'm going to reveal too much now, but you'll hear it coming up in some of the shows, and as patrons I want you to have some insight into it before I do it. But partnering with these guys because actually these ladies, it's a woman-owned business. They have created a couple different food products from cricket protein. Yes, cricket protein. Very interesting. There's chips, cricket chips. They're so good, actually. I love them. My wife won't eat them because she's scared to eat bugs, and you can't tell it's made out of crickets. But whatever. Anyway, the cost per gram of protein in terms of the environment is extremely lower, almost 100 times lower to create grams of protein from cricket meal than it is to create it from a cow. And that's pretty wild. That's a fascinating concept. You ever gone out in your backyard and looked around and gone, man, we got too many spiders, we got too many crickets, we got too many ants and flies. And then I'm not saying you should start grabbing flies. I know an old lady who swallowed a fly. I guess she'll die. No, what am I saying? This is my second cup of coffee. I probably need to stop now. They have created a way or a process to create grams of protein that might be just as good as the grams of protein from a cow, maybe better, way less saturated fat involved. Um, and I'm not saying there's any scientific studies about whether or not we should eat bugs over cows, but the point is, when we talk about the environment and we talk about a way forward with regard to nutrition, there might be a way that we can have a higher protein, maybe higher fat, lower processed carbohydrate diet that doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg and doesn't have to ruin our environment at the same time while trying to feed the population. So look out for that. I'm pretty excited about it. We'll be revealing that soon on the show. I'm in talks with them right now as to a partnership for that. They're coming out with a protein product for a protein shake, sending me some so I can tell them whether or not it tastes like garbage. So anyway, I'll be anxious to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Anyway, thank you for joining me for this. Thank you for your commitment to defining dad bod and supporting this movement. I put this out in a post on Facebook for people to comment on and whatnot. Not this particular video, but this article. And I want you to know, there are a lot of things that we don't know in the scientific community about health and fitness. Something as simple as how many grams of fat should you be eating if you're eating this many grams of carbohydrates? We don't know. And are LDL particle size good or bad when you have a low carbohydrate diet? We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. However, they can say more research needs to happen and we need to talk about how these things affect people over a lifespan. I work with a community of people who need to know now how they should be living, because we don't have time. While we're passing on these habits to our kids, we don't have time right now for them to study this stuff for 20 years. I don't care how much money's poured into it. I don't have time in my lifetime. I'm living right now. I don't have time for them to decide, is beef something that I should be eating if I'm eating this many grams of long grain brown rice? We don't have that luxury. And so what I'm saying to you is that this movement is so important because we're cutting through the stuff that we don't know and giving people answers about how to live their life practically. I talked about, we don't know LDL, HDL, triglycerides. We don't know how that affects cardiovascular disease. We have no idea. And if we're being honest, we were not sure. And so I talked about how we are sure about sugar. And so when people talk to me about how much fat should I be eating and stuff, I always stop what we're talking about and say, how many grams of sugar are you eating in a day? And we can focus on the things we know will make a difference for us and our kids. So I appreciate your support as patrons in Defining Dad Bod in the Inner Circle to support a movement where we are focusing on what we do know, and we're focusing on what we can practically apply to our lives. And we're working on supporting and encouraging and helping people to make those positive changes, to make a difference in their health and fitness now, despite what's confusing out there about the science of nutrition and exercise. And I'm excited. I'm excited to have some answers about whether the ketogenic diet could be beneficial to certain types of people for the long term. I'm excited to know stuff like that. But we don't have the luxury of time in changing our health and fitness now. I don't want that to keep people from making a decision to better themselves right now in the small ways we know that we can better ourselves. So thank you for your support. Thank you for encouraging me as I encourage people to make the changes we know how to make now and to practically apply the health and fitness science that is a consensus now. And I hope that you'll be a part of that in your own community. And I hope that you'll encourage those of you in your circles who think this way as well to support the movement, because I couldn't do this without you. So this has been Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. Thank you, my inner circle, for being supporters of the movement of Defining Dad Bod. We're over a year going strong, a lot of cool things happening. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you. Until next time, guys, kick butt, take names.